Hi, right-wing media. Can we have a little chat about how you're going out of your way to undermine the government after yesterday's spending review, but also how you're going out of your way to elevate reform in the eyes of voters? Let's start from the premise that Sir Simon Case spoke about when he was on the Laura Kuenssberg programme, that when Labour came into office, every red light was showing because the country was in such a state. Let's also take as a premise that the left wing will never think that Starmer and his government are doing enough. The Telegraph have quite an angry photo of Rachel saying that she might have just killed NATO. Andrew Neil of the Daily Mail has said that Rachel was just speaking delusional drivel. The Times say that she's turned on the tap for more taxes. The Independent says as a big headline, it's inevitable that we're going to have to pay more taxes. But its smaller print actually says, oh, we may have to. The Express talks about taxes and how we're going to have to brace ourselves. The Telegraph on the front page says that defence has been hit, whereas the Financial Times says that defence was a big winner. And just to show the misogyny is alive and well in the right-wing media, the Times have decided to write an entire article about what she was wearing and her new haircut. They acknowledge that it is terribly inappropriate to be doing this, but that doesn't stop them carrying on. They note that when she's speaking in Parliament, she uses her index finger to point at the words that she's saying. Now, if anybody's ever spoken in public, you will know that when you look up to speak to the public and you look back down on your page, you sort of suddenly have a word blindness, which is really throwing. So it makes complete sense to do this. However, they've decided to say that this is really making her like a 3-year-old doing their phonics test. As part of the narrative of the spending review, Reeves noted that she, along with a lot of the cabinet, went to state schools. They were working class. They understood where the difficulties were. It was their lived life experience. However, this newspaper has decided to say basically they were only able to get into the positions that they were because the Tories had helped them in the 80s. But there was another constant narrative, how seemingly this spending review was all down to reform. A spending review, which seemingly takes months to put together, which we've been told almost daily got right up to the wire, was, according to this newspaper, made with reform in mind. That'll be this reform, who, when they announced what they would do with the economy, got these sorts of headlines. And these. In fact, is it time to question why a party with actually such small real influence is being championed quite so much by the press? Don McGowan, the journalist, every month does a little roundup about how much media coverage each party gets. Look how much Reform have been getting, even though they haven't got very much power. Even their brand new MP managed 75 media appearances, compared to the Lib Dems and the Greens, who got 40 combined. Whilst of course every media outlet is going to have its own political bias, there seems to be something more toxic about what the media are doing towards Rachel Reeves and the Labour government than normal. I don't think anybody would argue that Rachel Reeves is a good communicator, which doesn't help anyway. But there seems to be something deeply personal about how the press attack women. This post by Tim Walker describing her speech and her lack of emotion, to be fair, reads like diagnostic criteria for ASD. Who's to say whether it is or not? However, it will be a description that a lot of people with ASD will relate to. So suddenly, that's to be judged now, is it? For clarity, I'm not suggesting that she's on the spectrum or not. I just find it very interesting that the narrative very quickly becomes very, very personal. I asked AI to have a little look around what the headlines were, and it was really interesting reading. GB News, supported by Nigel Farage, suggests that it's a fantasy spending review. Strange, really, to assume that Farage and co are experts in the economy. Interestingly, the very neutral Reuters and the Associated Press just spoke about a 2.3% increase in spending. But the big narrative, pushed by all of them, is that this spending review is as a result of the rise of reform. Life's too short for me to research it, so I asked ChatGPT to do it for me. And seemingly, it's utter bollocks. Since September 2023, Labour have been promising to invest outside the southeast of England. In fact, in the Labour conference of 2023, she spoke about if she became Chancellor, she would reform the Green Book, which allows her to change where the money is spent. Their manifesto spoke about securenomics. In January 2024, Lisa Nandy's on the record for saying that Labour wanted to level up. Since getting into government, their own Red Wall MPs have been lobbying to get the investment outside of London. And in their 2024 manifesto pre-briefings, they spoke to journalists at length about their path to prosperity for all regions. So, whether we like the spending review or not, they did the spending review that they promised, which had nothing to do with reform. I think the narrative would be easier to believe if reform's own economic policy was anything like viable. But so far, everything they've said has just been met with ridicule. And whilst there are a lot of people unhappy with what the spending review said today, Reform's proposal would actually strip a further £274 billion from government spending. And none of it is being framed against the impact of what Donald Trump is doing in America and indeed the ripples that is having throughout the world. Which brings me back to the question, why are the media framing everything through the eyes of Farage? Anyway, good chat, as you were.